You're about to listen to me read an excerpt from my book, Necessary. This particular chapter is titled Through the Fire. This is a live book reading I did a couple days ago, and I would love for you all to listen. I apologize for the audio. I was not on my standard microphone, but I would love for you all to listen to it and be greatly encouraged. Again, you're about to listen to a short reading from my book, Necessary, and this particular chapter is titled Through the Fire. I pray sincerely you are encouraged. I love you all. I want to challenge you to listen to this, and I pray that it helps you. I'm reading from my book, Necessary. This chapter is called Through the Fire. I'm not going to read it all. I'm just going to pick up from the middle of one of the paragraphs. I will never forget when at a church service, one of our ministers delivered a powerful sermon to encourage the congregation to never let anyone or any situation pull us away from seeking God. He said the top 3 things that can break a person down, ruin a family, or destroy someone's faith are marriage or relationship issues, financial issues, or health issues. He went on to say that while there are certainly many other areas that can challenge us in life, these 3 areas tend to be the most common challenges. I remember that day and that sermon like it was yesterday. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I thought to myself as I looked around the congregation, my God, I'm experiencing all 3 of these issues. Am I the only person in this building who is experiencing such sorrow, such stress, such disaster, all at the same time? I thought about my marriage as I sat in church that day. My marriage was in the blazing furnace during that time, and we were having arguments on a consistent basis. To say things were bad would be a tremendous understatement. I can't even count the times I threatened to leave. That was not how things were supposed to turn out. We both loved God with all our hearts, and we led Bible discussions helping many people make a commitment to follow God. We also helped to restore many marriages on the brink of divorce. In essence, our household was the lighthouse for broken spirits who were on the verge of giving up. It was common practice to host numerous events and Bible studies in our home, helping anyone and feeding anyone who showed up. Then one day, we found ourselves going through some of the very trials we were counseling other people through and falling prey to the very things we warned them about. How is it possible to love and serve God, yet experience such strange, unexpected fires? It just made no sense to me at all. And just as I felt I couldn't take on anything else, the fires turned up even hotter in my life. I started experiencing some major financial problems that seemed to grow worse as the economy took a bad turn. We owned a small agency together, and the mounting pressures from depending on one source of income and a fluctuating economy and a failing marriage was almost too much to bear. I was feeling completely stressed at that time, working late in the evenings and doing everything I knew to avoid a complete financial collapse. No matter how much water I threw on the fire, the flames just seemed to grow higher and higher. Our first child was born with a chronic medical condition which made the hospital our second home due to multiple trips on almost a monthly basis throughout his life to manage his intense sickle cell pain. I can't count the number of times I felt so helpless watching my child scream in agony, knowing that there was little I could do to take his pain away. Sometimes his pain was so severe the doctors would maximize the amount of pain medication they could give him just to take the edge off of his pain. I remember one day I took him swimming, and I had to immediately rush him to the hospital as soon as he got out of the water because the water was too cold for him, and it triggered another sickle cell crisis. He was in such excruciating pain that I ran every red light just to get him to the hospital in time for treatments. I would have traded places with my son in a minute because as a parent, I would rather endure the pain myself than to see my child suffer. As I sat in church service that day, I remember thinking to myself, I don't know anyone who can relate to what I'm going through. I keep praying, but nothing's changing. No one understands how hard I'm trying to keep things together and how much I'm denying myself to take care of everyone else. I felt so drained, so misunderstood, so unloved, so uncared for, so tired, so exhausted. So I began to do what most people unknowingly do in life when life begins to spin out of control. I began to embrace counterfeit gods. Of course, I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time. I still went to church and read my Bible and prayed whenever I could muster up the strength to pray or cry out to God, but I needed an escape from what I could not control.
I needed a happy place even if it wasn't good for me, even if it was only temporary, even if it actually made things worse. I used to fantasize quite a bit in my younger years by creating an imaginary world. Because I had a vivid imagination, it was very easy for me to escape from my reality in traumatic events by imagining characters and scenes where I could determine how the story ended. It came as no surprise as I began to experience some of the most difficult moments in my life as an adult. I found myself spending pockets of time revisiting those foreign lands. By this time, I had mastered fantasizing because it became a natural part of my life when I was bored, felt unloved, unprotected, or saddened by a situation. It was my own little secret space that brought me comfort and joy when I couldn't find it externally. And I saw nothing wrong with it. After all, I wasn't hurting anyone, right? Whether I was going to sleep or sitting alone, I learned how to disconnect from my reality and get lost in another world of romance and make-believe fantasies where there were no issues, a world that made me feel loved and beautiful, happy and secure. This fantasy world of false realities became one of my primary escapes. I was never someone who watched a lot of television or movies, so this became my source of entertainment and, to a larger degree, my escape from what I felt was missing in my life. It took me many years to realize I was playing in Satan's backyard because those harmless fantasies became my escape to the point where it nearly replaced my prayer life and my desire to seek God when I was going through difficult times. I believe imagination and creativity is a gift from God, but nothing should ever take its place on the throne. I got to the point where I would rather lie down or go for a drive and immerse myself in a fantasy than put in the necessary work to deal with my troubling reality. In that season of my life, I was consumed with worrying about finances, doing my best to raise 4 small children, running back and forth to the hospital on a consistent basis, dealing with a marriage that was hanging by a thread, and trying to take care of everyone else who came to me with an issue or a need. I was just done. So what did I do? I found another counterfeit God. I started going to casinos to sit on a penny slot machines to completely forget about all my problems. It didn't matter that I didn't have a lot of money. I would sit for hours with a little bit of money just to hear the sound of the machines and escape from the pressures of life. Though my schedule was always very busy with work and motherhood and what seemed like a million other things, I would take every opportunity I could find to run back to the casino where my troubles were not allowed to enter. The casino welcomed me with open arms. She lit a pathway for me to enter with a promise to make me rich overnight and solve all my problems. She gave me friends who sat to my right and to my left on penny slot machines while we gambled away our coins, laughing and pretending all was well. We all had hopes of winning a jackpot and riding off into the sunset to finally live life to the fullest. It didn't matter that on any given day we were total strangers rooting for each other. In those moments, we were best friends as we cheered each other on whenever one of us entered a jackpot round or a bonus. Going to the casino quickly became by far my most fun leisure activity. It was so much fun, so free, and so away from my reality, and it was favored over just about any other event. And anytime I was able to save up a few extra dollars, I always kept it aside for my next casino adventure because the penny slot machines always greeted me and welcomed me to come on down and try my luck. You might be tempted to think, so what's the problem? There's nothing wrong with a little bit of fun now and then. Well, on one end, I totally agree with that, but herein lies the problem. Anytime I was bored, angry, feeling unloved, under financial pressure, etc., I found myself wanting to go to the casino instead of running into the arms of God. Then I found myself lying about how much I'd spent and always longing for the next trip the moment a problem arose in my life. I would get highly defensive if anyone challenged me about why I wanted to go. I was a pro at justifying why I deserved to go. I reasoned that I didn't go often, didn't spend much money, and didn't do anything else for fun in my life. But when I returned home, my reality was always there to greet me at the door. The problem for me was why I went to the casino. I went to run away from my reality. I went to solve my financial woes. I went to flee from the pressure I was under. I went to find peace and happiness. I went to forget all the pains from my past. I ran to casinos as an escape because I was afraid of what the future held for me. Instead of laying my pain on the altar of God and seeking His divine guidance and help, I chose to numb it, if only for a moment. When we are not filled with the knowledge and power of God, something else has to fill that void. Yet those counterfeit gods never hold true to their promises. They always leave us feeling lonely, hopeless, and filled with anxiety and stress. Counterfeit gods always point us to alternative solutions, such as gambling or drugs or pouring ourselves into our job, worshiping relationships out of desperation or fear of rejection, the love of money, and so on. God allowed me to reach a very low place in my life. I felt so powerless. I was ashamed of who I had become. But you couldn't tell that from the outside. On the outside, I looked like I had it all together. A nice house, married, my own business, a master's degree, the works. But on the inside, I was filled with despair, loneliness, fear, worry, anxiety, stress, and feelings of being unloved. To make matters worse, in my pride and arrogance, I walked around as if everything was fine. I still had an image to keep up. And with the exception of opening up to a few people at my church, I didn't want anyone to think I wasn't strong enough or smart enough to survive and figure things out on my own. After all, that was the story of my life. Only this time that didn't work for me. I was out of answers. I was tired. The fire was too hot at that point. I had already tried just about everything I knew to do to turn my circumstances around. You name it, and I probably tried it. Individual counseling, marriage counseling, working long hours to make more money, trying to force changes to happen, going to church, praying, cursing people out. You name it, I did it. I tried everything I knew to do, and nothing seemed to work. The fire only grew hotter and hotter. I couldn't even find many friends who I felt could relate to all the simultaneous pressures and pains I was experiencing at that time. Their version of a tough day seemed equivalent to complaining about a melted ice cream sundae to me. Most of the time, I didn't even bother to venture into deep topics with others because I felt if one more happy person told me to just trust in God, I was going to hit them. I got tired of hearing the same repeated messages from those whom I felt were not in the fires, nor have ever experienced such blazing fires in their lives. I know it was not right for me to think that way. Life has shown me that our individual experiences are all relative. And just because someone can't relate to our pain doesn't mean they haven't experienced pain themselves. But none of that mattered at the time. I just didn't have any patience for what I categorized as bubblegum conversations. I tried talking to God, but He wasn't speaking back to me. He wasn't solving anything. He wasn't moving fast enough. At least that's what I felt at the time. I would pray to Him, cry out to Him, and feel good for a moment, but nothing significant happened after that. In fact, at times, things seemed to get worse. So I held on to my counterfeit gods because at least they made me feel happy. At least they pretended to care. But as with all alternative counterfeit gods, running to them only made matters worse. The more I escaped to temporary pleasures, the greater my problems intensified. Soon I began chasing the money that I had lost in the casinos. To no surprise, that created even more issues in my household. And the one thing I thought was completely harmless began to take the place of my prayer life because it became easier for me to fantasize about the life I wanted than to accept my reality and begin to do the real work that was needed for my refinement. I could no longer keep up with the image I worked so hard to protect because the fires began to spread into my workplace and into just about every area of my life. I even lost some friends. And in my anger, I said hurtful words to people I love. Words that can never be taken back. Words that broke relationships and burned down bridges that took years to rebuild. I'm going to skip around a little bit because then I go on to talk about the fires continue to rise in my life, and I even end up losing my mom and some other things happen. So I'm going to skip down to page 36 and get to another part in this story. I had to be transformed and allow God to pour new wine into new wineskins. That's Matthew 9:16. I had to have more of him and less of me. That's John 3:30. So I went all in. I decided to put pressure on God's integrity to see if he would truly do what he said he would do if I fully surrendered to him. I started attending a weekly Bible study session that focused heavily on teaching me how to sit still and listen to the Holy Spirit. I'm going to jump down just a little bit more. I go into some of the passages that I read, and some of the passages that really turned a lot of things around in my life. And some of those passages I mentioned is Colossians 2, verse 2 through 3, Galatians 3:26, 1 Corinthians 10:13, John 14:26, and Revelations 12:9, which talks about how deceptive Satan is. So I'm just going to skip around a little bit more. I began to spend a few minutes sitting in my closet every night to simply pour out my heart to God. Within a few weeks, those minutes turned into hours, and much of that time was simply sitting in silence in his presence. Most of the time, I was too weak and too exhausted to pray, so I just sat in his presence and listened. To be completely transparent, the vast majority of the time, I heard nothing at all, so I just sat. Then, little by little, God began to reveal hidden secrets to me. I soon replaced fruitless arguments with Bible study. I started praying instead of fantasizing, meditating on biblical passages instead of running to counterfeit gods, playing gospel music and spiritual songs throughout my day instead of allowing my mind to play negative narratives, controlling my tongue by remembering scriptures about God's faithfulness and his protection instead of always feeling the need to defend my character, and fighting in the spirit to get my strength, joy, and peace from God instead of making the casino my primary option for happiness. Strange things began to happen in my life as I repented and let go of my counterfeit gods and instead aligned my life with the Word of God. I began to experience a level of peace that I couldn't explain. It didn't make sense for me to feel peace when my circumstances hadn't changed that much. My God. It was a peace that surpassed all understanding. That's Philippians 4:6-7. Because instead of focusing on what was wrong in my life, God kept me occupied with gladness of heart. That's Ecclesiastes 5:20. Not only did God begin to fill me with inner peace, he began to change the way I viewed my life. And even better than that, God had the audacity to begin to change my life. And then I just go on to say, little did I know the hand of God was always masterfully at work, standing with me in the fires, refining me, chipping away at my pride and arrogance, building my testimony, molding my character, teaching me to persevere, planting empathy and compassion in my heart for others, and purifying me to come forth as pure gold so that I could give hope to the brokenhearted and encourage others who stand in the blazing fire. I'm going to stop reading right there because there's plenty more to read in this chapter. But I pray that you all have been encouraged. My name is Zenja Glass. I just read a little bit from my book, Necessary. This is a chapter called Through the Fire. And though I jumped around a little bit and I didn't finish it because there's definitely some more pages in here to read, I pray that it is encouraging you all. Never give up on God. Understand that sometimes you can be holding on to counterfeit gods, and counterfeit gods always will disappoint us. But when I began to run to God and sit in his presence, he had the audacity to begin to change my life. I love you all. If you don't have a copy of Necessary, make sure you get your hands on a copy of it right away.
I love you all. You're listening to Unlocking Greatness Podcast with Zenja Glass.